start out by making the body of our casserole. Casseroles, I really kind of think of them as jars, which are easy and fun to make, but then you make them an oval shape, and so everything else becomes more difficult than it needs to be, right? You can make round casseroles. All that is basically just like a really thick jar that you then give like little nubbins on the side so that you have someplace to grab it out of the oven, right? So I've got 5 pounds here. Point being, I'm going to basically make a really wide open bottom cylinder, right? So we're just going to center this like we center everything else, right? Little cone up, cone down. This clay's real soft. There's a new bag of little loafers, and it's like buttery. That seems pretty close. So what we're going to basically do is, almost like we were making a plate or a platter, I'm going to drop down with my fist because I want this to be like a puck, a really wide puck center. 5 pounds. So I'm basically pushing in with like the palm of my hand, and then I'm going to drag out as I do, and this will yield me more of that puck shape that I want. Like so. What you don't want to do is you don't want to start with that sort of tall center that I had, drop all the way to the bottom, and then try to pull that out like 6 or 7 inches. It's just much more difficult than what I'm showing you. So now that this is pretty low, pretty flat, and pretty wide, we will drop down all the way to the back. So now I'm going to pull out gently, right? Because you don't want to overdo this.
You're all the way at the bat?
Yeah. Huh? Yeah, I'm all the way down at the bat, yeah. And so I have my hand on the outside as well, just to sort of compress. That way it doesn't get all wonky as I pull out, because it is likely that if you do this at the wrong speed, it starts to get sort of ovoid. It's not the end of the world, because we're going to change the shape of this afterwards anyways. But I do want this to be almost as wide as it will let itself be based on the size of my bat. Because the wider this is, once I oval it, the bigger casserole we're going to get, right? And then from here, because we're out almost all the way to the side of the bat, and this is a bigger bat than usual, right, for that purpose, for that intent. Now I'm going to start pulling. And I do want to keep everything a little thicker than I usually would, especially the rim. Because I'm going to need to put a gallery in there, and it's going to have to be a pretty hefty gallery. Remember, a gallery is where the lid sits. So I'm going to keep this very lip real chunky. And I'm going to keep it pretty chunky everywhere else too, because if this is something you plan on putting in the oven, you want it to have thickness so that it has better heat absorption. So
how thick? Based on the size?
Yeah, based on the size. If everything you're usually shooting for is a 1/4 inch, maybe go not quite a 1/2 inch, but a little under that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then shape's totally up to you. I like to keep it sort of vertical. And this is, for the most part, like what we're shooting for, right? So I'm going to come down here, scrape some of that excess clay off the bottom. Do some shaping. Just so I can get some compression going on. Who said that?
It doesn't matter.
I didn't.
I'm just going to move out of the way so the laser's coming out of the eyes.
So from here, I have to put a gallery into it, right? So I'm going to make sure that this is nice and chunky. Then I'm going to take a corner of a wooden rib. I like to do this by pinching the inside and the outside of the lip. We do have a smidge of a wobble. I could cut that off if I wanted to. I don't really mind though, because it's going to become a gallery anyways. So, take the corner of a tool, halfway down, and I'm kind of just driving straight down to make that gallery. Being careful not to make this part right here too thin. So I'm going to beef that up a little bit with some compression. Same thing on like where you split it, where it sort of folds down. This will end up kind of sharp, which I don't want. There's a very particular reason you're making this like a much thicker gallery than usual, and that's because of the way you do the lid. Or one of the ways you can do the lid, I should say. And I do want to kind of keep this round, just because I find when I make really square galleries, things have to fit perfect. But if I have kind of a rounded gallery, I get a little bit more wiggle room. So theoretically, because I do have like a smidge, that up and down undulation, when you fold it over, turns into side to side undulation, which you can leave if you want. I'm going to cut a little bit of it off, because we can.
If you wanted to make a round casserole,
You would just do the same thing, but you would leave the bottom on it. Yeah. So we took the bottom off of this one
you want to oval.
because I want to oval it at a later point. Exactly. Cool. So this looks good to me. So we might call it here. I'm going to check the outside to make sure that shape didn't get too weird. Again, I like to stick with a pretty sort of vertical shape like that. And that's the casserole body, right? All right, so that's the body. This is the floor, right? I usually throw the floor of the piece. You could just roll out a slab if you wanted to. I find if I throw it, it kind of seems more congruent with what I did because there's like throwing marks on the casserole body and that sort of thing. Another reason is I like to put a spiral in it so that you're like, oh, how did he make it oval shaped but the bottom's round? You know what I mean? So all I did here was take maybe like 3 pounds of clay and I kind of just squished it down into like plate shape until it was flat, right? So now we're gonna put this one. I didn't really think I needed to show you guys how to do that. But if you don't know, it's that same process I did the last one with where I sort of used the palm of my hand and squish down and out and squish down and out and then compress the hell out of it. Cool. And I made this one yesterday so that we could do this. So what I basically do is set it down somewhere in the middle. And this was just one that I threw round, squished into an oval shape. I'll spin it so you guys can see. Ooh, wow. Fancy.
How dry do you get it before you start squishing?
For a, you don't want your finger marks to show up. So maybe like really soft leather harp. Yeah, exactly. So I made this yesterday at 10 a.m. and I ovaled it at 4 p.m. I just left it out all day, you know what I mean, until it was ready. So there's a couple ways you can decide on how you want to attach this. First thing I usually like to do is just trace where my lines meet, just so I have an idea there, right?
So your bottom is as big as your wide side.
Exactly, right? So I had to throw a big plate, even though this is kind of a small thing, right? So I might actually mark the inside so that you can't see it. And I'm not cutting all the way through. I just kind of want to see where my my inside and my outside line up so that I can do some scratching and attaching. And so on and so forth, right? So I'm going to move this guy off, if it'll let me. Sometimes if you put things on really wet, they'll just instantly fuse together, right? So I'm just going to, right where my lines are, give myself some scoring. And because this is wet, I don't have to use like a ton of slip or anything, right? I can use maybe just a smidge of some moisture because slip is just clay and water, and we have clay here and we have water here, right? I should be very mindful and slip and score this pretty well because this one is drier, right? Flip it upside down. So if I wanted to, this is at a state where I could squeeze it more. I think this is a pretty good shape right now though, so I'm going to leave it. Try to line this up, and then I'm going to give it some wiggle and some pressure downwards. Right, like so. I'm then going to go on the inside, and anywhere those joins are, I'm going to hit with a paintbrush, trying to really seal that stuff. I'm going to seal from the inside first, just so I don't have to think about it again. Downside here is you do kind of mess up that spiral that you made, but that's not the end of the world. So get that nice and sealed, where you can't see any cracks. And now you got to decide what you want the outside to look like, right? Oftentimes I will give myself more space than I need, and then I can sort of fold it over the edges. This will make more sense if I just do it, right? You could cut it flush and then call it, right? But what I like to do is cut it a little bit wider so that I can fold it over the edge. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give myself a little bit of a wide berth for how much space I need. Like so. And then oftentimes I'll just scrape this excess stuff off just to see what I'm working with better. Let's see how much space I get myself. That seems fine. Cool. So what I'm going to do now is wire under it. Again, everything is more complicated with this process than just a jar. Wire under the whole thing. And I did leave the plate there kind of thick. The base, right? Because I knew I was going to have to wire it off. Like so. And then I'll usually set it someplace dry. You know what I mean? Just so I can sort of keep an eye on it. And also, so that I can flip it upside down. And then from here, sort of scope out how much space I have. I've given myself a little more space than I need. I'm going to grab kind of wire cutting tool. This is also a time when you can embellish, right? So let's embellish. Let's make it wiggly.
Cheese cutter. Yeah.
Yeah, this is just a cheese cutter.
Pottery cheese cutter.
Well, yeah, it says pottery in the front, so it was more expensive.
When you had your helper help you get that piece off, if you would run some water under your wire, would that have
Maybe.
been okay?
Might have helped, yeah. So I'm just trying to make this look kind of even. It doesn't have to be perfect to me. The next thing I'm going to do is I need a roller. And then I'm going to actually see how much space I have. There might be a couple spaces that have a lot still, like this one over here is a little too wide. So I'm going to get it a little more flush with my body of my piece. I'm going to do that by getting underneath it so I can actually see what's going on, instead of trying to guesstimate from the top. Now we're seeming like we're pretty close there, right? Now what I'm going to do, take my roller, and where I think the edge is, start to just roll it down. Slowly but surely, we're basically going to roll this until it attaches itself to the wall of the piece. You don't have to embellish it like this too. I'm going to come in and soften all those curves later on, but
I mean, I was wondering what you were doing for a hot minute, but then now it makes a lot more sense.
yeah, it just
like,
looks
aesthetically.
Yeah,
like,
it looks
it's
finished.
really cool.
Yeah.
You know, positive.
Yeah.
Relief. Yeah.
Whereas before it would just like end. You know what I mean? You don't have to do this, but just something you can do, right? Cool. I'm not going to do anything to the bottom yet. At some point, I will probably put it on one of our bevelers just to make it sort of arch in the middle. But the bottom seems pretty good to me. I might hit the sort of sharp edges here with a sponge just to sort of soften them a little bit. I think I'm going to call it with that though. So I'm going to flip it back over, and we'll do our next annoying part, which is the lid. And I'll show you a couple ways we could do that, right? So I'm going to take these three little nubbins. I'm going to put them in a triangle formation, like so. That way when I put a plaster bat on, they will stick a little bit. Where is my sponge?
Right.
Aha, lovely. Good job, team. Whenever I put plaster on something, either like clay because I'm going to throw it over the top, or this because it's going to touch these lugs, I do wet it just a smidge. And then I'm going to eyeball center this. I'm going to do that just by keeping track of where it's getting closer to my finger. and then moving it inward right there. You could also tap center this. That seems pretty good. Give it a couple firm presses down. And then also try to make sure it's not super unlevel. It's rounded top, so you're not going to be able to level it with the level, but you just want it to be close. I'm going to add some moisture here. And then I threw out this slab earlier. I didn't roll it out because I knew I was going to place it on here and have to do some work to it, right? So there's a slab here that I'm then going to, from the middle, start to it's almost like doing a pull where I'm using the mold as my inside hand, you know what I mean? So I'm kind of with pressure pulling down. This will get wider as I go, right? Almost like compression pulling. So we want to make it a little bit wider. The reason I have this, so I can just make sure that we're wide enough in some direction to get our lid out of it, right? I usually will do a lot of compression on these too. One of the things that's cool about doing a lid this way is every part is kind of thrown. You know what I mean? So all the parts can sort of reference each other. And I just did this on one that's completely rounded on the whole top there. That way my domed lid can be completely rounded as well, right? So scope it out. That looks pretty good to me. I might put like a little spiral in there so that, again, much like working with intent, now the inside will match up with the fact that there's throwing lines in the wall, which will potentially match up with the fact that there's throwing lines in the lid. So let's put those in. Spirally doodad. Call it a day, right? I don't cut this off of here until it gets to sort of like a leather hard stage, maybe like soft leather hard, and then I'm just going to, with that shape in mind, cut it out rough, a little bit bigger than it needs to be, and then just with a sure form, carve it until it fits perfect into this oval shape. It's annoying to do, but will yield you kind of a cool result, right? The easier, I don't know if I'll say easier, the other version of that is for you to roll out a slab. Put this guy back on here. Roll out a slab, and then slump mold in this as your mold. That doesn't make very much sense, right?
Oh, really? Never heard this. Slump mold it? So that would, oh, no way, that's cool.
So we will put plastic over. We will take, this is another reason you want the body to be firm, right? Set this on there. And then, this is where we grab a bag of sand. Yeah, grab your bag of sand. And then I'm just very gently.
Did you buy that at high water?
Huh? The bag of sand, yeah. This is a pottery sand, guys. Yeah. But I'm going to like maybe lift up a corner. You know what I mean? That'll let some of the air out as I sort of tamp. And then I just work my way around until I can see the outside shape of the form, right? So you guys can see there's like a little bit of a slump right now, but nothing crazy. So I just very gradually, I don't need it to be a super deep dome as well. Like I kind of like a sort of flattish dome. So this will yield you that really well. The way this is easier is that you know the shape of your piece. You know what I mean? You don't have to sort of use the drawing and then estimate and do it all by hand. Again, it's a lid, so you should probably make 2 for every one like you would if it was a handle or if it was just a regular jar. So why not make both? Whatever one looks better is the one you should use. And so I'm just kind of letting gravity and the weight of the sand do the work here. I'm not actually pressing down very hard. And when I start to get to the outside edge, I might put a smidge more pressure there just to sort of coax it down. And what I want is I want to cut this to match the outside edge of my piece, right? Reason being, my body is already dry, the top is wet, so it's going to shrink. If I cut it to fit now, it's going to shrink to the point where it doesn't fit, right? So I'm going to cut it to where it doesn't fit, hoping that it'll shrink to the point that it fits. Does that make any sense?
You could also like sure form it.
You could sure form it. Sure forming a slab that's wet is difficult. You know what I mean? Oh yeah, you can't sure form it to finalize the shape.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. Time being, I'm just gonna grab a different cheese cutter. And then very gently, I'm just gonna get close. I don't need it to be perfect. You know what I mean? Because I do plan on coming in here later and refining it. You can run it all the way until you hit the edge of your piece. The plastic makes it a little difficult. So oftentimes I work in stages where I go around, cut off excess, go around, cut off excess, and then I'll cut it flush. This all making sense though? This is a weird demo. It's like you do stuff that you don't do in any other thing, right? Which is one of the reasons I don't make casseroles very often. There are fun, but again, like, I will make a lot of a thing if I know it sells well, or I know I'm going to use it at home. I'll make a bazillion of them because I think it's really interesting. I have a bunch of mixing bowls, you know what I mean? And a bunch of like accoutrement bowls for when I'm cooking and that sort of deal. But I'm not a big like macaroni in the oven type of guy. You know what I mean?
I told my customers to put it in the oven and heat the oven with it.
Yes, preheat it in the oven, absolutely. So now I've got it, for the most part, roughed out to the shape it needs to be. I'm not going to do anything else until things get to sort of leather hard, and then I will attach a knob or some kind of handle and that sort of deal, right?
Did you angle that at all, or is it?
This?
Yeah.
I had to angle it just so I could cut it flush with the rim here. Doesn't have to be angled, it can be sort of whatever shape. I'll probably clean this up so it's rounded on all sides later, but our lid. Everybody feel good? Casseroles, guys, we did it. We did the thing.